gavel crack echoed through Multnomah County Courthouse like a gunshot, silencing the murmur of spectators packed into the oak-paneled room. Everything hinged on the next 10 minutes, whether justice would favor wealth and polish, or truth spoken in a working man's voice. Margaret Ashford sat at the plaintiff's table in a cream Chanel suit, her blonde hair swept into a perfect chignon, diamonds glinting at her throat and wrists. She was 38, beautiful in that preserved way that money afforded, and she radiated the absolute certainty of someone who'd never lost anything that mattered. Across the aisle sat Daniel Carter, 42 years old, in a borrowed sport coat that pulled slightly across his broad shoulders. His hands, scrubbed clean but permanently stained by years of diesel and road grime, rested on the table. A Peterbilt driver for 18 years, he looked exactly like what he was. A man who worked for every dollar and trusted that the truth would be enough. It was October 15th, 1976. Outside, Portland's autumn rain painted the windows in streaks. The case was simple on paper. Mrs. Ashford's Mercedes had been sideswiped on Highway 26 3 months earlier. She claimed Daniel had drifted into her lane while driving fatigued, causing $2,300 in damage and severe emotional distress. Daniel maintained she'd veered into his path while applying lipstick, something he'd stated clearly to the responding officer. But the officer's report had mysteriously gone missing, and without it, the case came down to credibility. Silk versus denim. Country club versus truck stop. Judge Harold Brennan, a stern man of 60 with silver hair and reading glasses perpetually perched on his nose, had already heard Margaret's testimony. She'd wept delicately, describing the terror of seeing the massive truck bearing down on her, the nightmares that followed, the way she now flinched at the sound of air brakes. The performance had been flawless. "Mr. Carter," Judge Brennan said, "you may present your testimony." Daniel stood, moving to the witness stand with the careful dignity of a man who knew he was being judged for more than his words. He placed his right hand on the Bible and swore to tell the truth. Margaret's attorney, a sharp-featured man named Whitmore, began immediately. "Mr. Carter, how many hours had you been driving that day?" 8 hours, sir. Well within legal limits." "And yet you admit you were tired?" "I said I was ready for my break. That's different from being impaired." "Is it?" Whitmore's smile was thin. "Tell me, how much do you earn annually as a truck driver?" Daniel's jaw tightened. "About $14,000. $14,000. Whitmore let the number hang. "And Mrs. Ashford's vehicle is worth $45,000. Do you see the disparity there, Mr. Carter? The carelessness of damaging something worth more than 3 years of your salary? Before we continue this story, I want to hear from you. Comment below and let me know where you're watching from and what time it is where you are. If you're enjoying this, hit that like button and subscribe. It helps more than you know." Margaret spoke without permission, her voice carrying across the courtroom. "Your Honor, I don't mean to interrupt, but I think we all understand what's happening here. Mr. Carter is a decent enough man in his sphere, I'm sure, but he simply doesn't comprehend the responsibilities that come with operating such dangerous machinery near people of—" She paused delicately. "Near people with real obligations. Real lives." The courtroom stirred. Several spectators shifted uncomfortably. Daniel's hands gripped the witness stand rail. "Ma'am, I've driven 1.2 million miles without a single accident. I have a wife and 2 daughters. I comprehend responsibility just fine." "Do you?" Margaret's smile was pitying. "Then perhaps you can explain why you've spent this entire proceeding looking like you'd rather be anywhere else." like this is beneath you, when in fact, you're the one beneath. Mrs. Ashford, that's enough. Judge Brennan's voice cut like steel, but Margaret was warming to her theme now, addressing the gallery. These men, they think the road belongs to them. They think because they drive those enormous machines, they're kings of the highway. Meanwhile, the rest of us, civilized people, have to dodge around them, praying they're not too tired or too careless or too ignorant to... Mrs. Ashford, sit down. The judge's tone left no room for argument. Daniel reached into his jacket pocket. His hand emerged holding a folded piece of paper, yellowed at the edges, creased from being carried for years. Your Honor, Daniel said quietly, may I read something into the record? Margaret's attorney stood. Objection. This is highly irregular. But Judge Brennan was watching Daniel with sudden, peculiar intensity. What is that document, Mr. Carter? It's a letter, sir, written to me 7 years ago. Daniel unfolded the paper with care. By Mrs. Ashford's father. The courtroom went absolutely silent. Margaret's face drained of color. That's not possible. My father never... Your Honor, Daniel continued, his voice steady. On March 23, 1969, I found a man having a heart attack in his car on the side of Highway 30. I was 20 minutes out of Portland, heading east. The man was alone, clutching his chest, barely conscious. His name was Robert Jameson. Margaret stood slowly, her hand reaching for the table as if she needed support. I performed CPR until the ambulance arrived, stayed at the hospital until his wife came. Before he went into surgery, he asked for my address. 6 weeks later, this letter arrived. Daniel began to read, and his voice carried the weight of every word. Dear Mr. Carter, the doctors tell me I would have died on that roadside if not for your quick action and steady hands. And that's when Judge Brennan removed his reading glasses and spoke 5 words that changed everything. Robert Jameson was my brother-in-law. What family secrets were about to unravel in that Oregon courtroom? And how had Margaret Ashford forgotten the man who saved her father's life? The judge's words hung in the air like smoke after a gunshot, impossible to ignore. Margaret Ashford's world was splitting at the seams, and everyone in the courtroom could see it happening. Judge Brennan set down his glasses with deliberate care, his expression unreadable, but his voice carrying the weight of personal history. Robert Jameson was married to my late wife's sister, Eleanor. I was there the day they brought him into the emergency room, March 23, 1969. He looked directly at Margaret. The doctors said if he'd been alone another 5 minutes, he wouldn't have made it. Margaret remained standing, her knuckles white against the plaintiff's table. Her mouth opened, closed, opened again. No sound emerged. Daniel continued reading, his voice steady but softer now, as if handling something sacred. Dear Mr. Carter, the doctors tell me I would have died on that roadside if not for your quick action and steady hands. My daughter Margaret was only 14 when her mother passed from cancer. The thought of leaving her orphaned, of not walking her down the aisle someday, or meeting my grandchildren, it haunts me still. You gave me the gift of future years. I will never forget your face, your calm voice telling me to hold on, that help was coming. If you ever need anything at all, you need only ask. You are forever in my prayers. With deepest gratitude, Robert Jameson. The silence that followed was cathedral deep. Someone in the gallery coughed. A woman in the 3rd row dabbed at her eyes with a handkerchief. Daniel refolded the letter with the same careful reverence. Mr. Jameson sent me a check with this letter. $500. More money than I'd ever seen at once. I sent it back. Told him in my reply that I was just glad he was alive, that any decent person would have done the same. Did he respond? Judge Brennan asked quietly. Yes, sir. He sent the check back again with a note saying his daughter was about to start college, and if I wouldn't accept payment, would I at least let him know if I ever needed a reference or a helping hand. He included his business card. Daniel pulled a worn card from the same pocket. Jameson Commercial Properties. I kept it all these years, never called, never asked for anything. Didn't seem right. Margaret finally found her voice. It came out strangled, barely above a whisper. When did he write that letter? May 8th, 1969, ma'am. It's dated right here. That's impossible. She shook her head, slowly at first, then more vigorously. My father never mentioned. He would have told me about something like that. He told me everything. Did he, though? Judge Brennan leaned forward. Mrs. Ashford, when did your father pass away? February of 1973. Her voice was hollow now, the earlier venom completely drained. Heart attack, his second one. He was only 51. I'm sorry for your loss, Daniel said, and meant it. I read about it in the paper, sent a sympathy card to the family, but I don't know if it ever reached you. Margaret sat down abruptly, as if her legs had given out. Her attorney leaned over to whisper something, but she waved him away with a trembling hand. The courtroom had transformed. Where minutes ago the spectators had watched a simple traffic dispute, they now witnessed something far more complex, a collision of memory, pride, and the uncomfortable weight of forgotten debts. Judge Brennan studied the letter, which Daniel had handed up. The judge's fingers traced the signature. This is Robert's handwriting. I'd recognize it anywhere. He had that distinctive way of crossing his T's. Your Honor, this is all very touching, Whitmore interjected, recovering his composure. But it has no bearing on the case at hand. Whether Mr. Carter once helped Mrs. Ashford's father doesn't change the facts of the accident 3 months ago. Doesn't it? The judge's gaze was sharp. It speaks directly to character, Mr. Whitmore. You've spent the morning painting Mr. Carter as careless and irresponsible. This letter suggests otherwise. Margaret was staring at Daniel now, really looking at him for the first time. Her eyes moved across his face as if searching for something lost. I was at Berkeley when you saved him. Sophomore year. I came home for the summer and my father was different. Lighter somehow. Grateful in a way I'd never seen before. He kept talking about second chances, about how every moment mattered. Her voice cracked. I thought he was just being philosophical after a brush with death. I never knew there was an actual person, an actual name attached to it. He didn't tell you? He said a trucker stopped to help. That was all. I assumed... She stopped, swallowed hard. I assumed it was just what people did. I never thought to ask for details. I was 20 years old and immortal. Death was something that happened to other people's parents. Shame bloomed across her features like a bruise forming in real time. Daniel's voice remained gentle. Your father was a good man, Mrs. Ashford. Kind and grateful. He shook my hand so hard in that hospital waiting room, I thought he'd pull my arm off. A small smile crossed his face. Told me his daughter was going to change the world someday. Said you had your mother's fire and his stubbornness. Margaret's composure finally shattered. Tears spilled down her carefully made-up face, cutting tracks through foundation and powder. He loved talking about my mother. Even years after she died, he'd light up just saying her name. The courtroom watched this unraveling with the uncomfortable intimacy of witnessing private grief made public. Judge Brennan cleared his throat. "Mrs. Ashford, would you like a recess?" She shook her head, wiping at her eyes with the back of her hand, a gesture so unguarded it erased years of practiced refinement. No, I need to." She turned to face Daniel fully. "Mr. Carter, I need to know exactly what happened on Highway 26. The truth. Not what I told myself, but what actually happened." Daniel met her eyes. "You drifted into my lane while reaching for something on your passenger seat. I saw you coming and tried to brake, but there wasn't enough distance. Your rear quarter panel caught my front bumper. Minimal damage on my end, scratched chrome. But I knew your car took the worst of it. Was I applying lipstick? I couldn't see that clearly, ma'am. Just that you were distracted." Margaret closed her eyes. "I was. I remember now. I was running late for a charity luncheon and I was trying to fix my face at a red light. But then the light changed, and I was still." She opened her eyes. "Why didn't you mention the letter before? At the accident scene? When the officer was taking statements?" "Because it had nothing to do with the accident. And because—" Daniel hesitated. "Because what?" "Because I didn't want you to think I was trying to use your father's memory as leverage." The words landed like stones in still water, rippling outward through the room. What other secrets had Robert Jameson kept from his daughter? And what else had Margaret's pride blinded her to? Silence can be heavier than words, and in that moment it pressed down on Margaret Ashford like a physical weight. The question wasn't just about a traffic accident anymore. It was about who she'd become in the years since her father's death. Margaret stood again, smoothing her skirt with shaking hands. When she spoke, her voice was stripped of its earlier condescension, raw and unsteady. "Your Honor, I need to withdraw my complaint." Whitmore shot to his feet. "Mrs. Ashford, I strongly advise against— I'm withdrawing it." Her tone left no room for argument. "This case was built on a lie, not Mr. Carter's lie. Mine." Judge Brennan removed his glasses, cleaning them with a handkerchief from his pocket. "Mrs. Ashford, you understand that's a serious admission. You're under oath." "I know." She turned to face the gallery, then back to Daniel. "I wasn't just distracted that day on Highway 26, I was angry. My husband Richard had called that morning to say he'd be missing our anniversary dinner, again, for a business meeting in Seattle. 3rd year in a row." Her laugh was bitter. "I was driving too fast, not paying attention, thinking about how my father would have never treated my mother that way. And when I clipped your truck, my first thought wasn't, is everyone okay? It was, how can I make sure this isn't my fault?" The courtroom was utterly still. Even the court reporter had stopped typing, watching. When the police officer arrived, you told him exactly what happened. That I drifted, that you tried to brake. I heard you say it. Margaret's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. And then I lied. I said you'd swerved into my lane. The officer looked skeptical, but I was wearing pearls and driving a Mercedes, and you were a truck driver, Daniel finished quietly. Yes. The word came out like a confession. The officer took my statement first, wrote it all down. Then he went to talk to you. But when he came back, he said there was a discrepancy and he'd need to file a full report. 3 weeks later, when my attorney requested the report for the insurance claim, we were told it had been lost. Filed incorrectly. I convinced myself it was fate. That the universe was telling me I deserved to win this one thing after losing so much. Judge Brennan's expression had shifted from judicial neutrality to something harder to read. Disappointment, perhaps, or recognition of a familiar human failing. "What did you lose, Mrs. Ashford?" he asked. Margaret's hand went to the diamond necklace at her throat, an unconscious gesture that spoke of armor, of protection. "After my father died, I inherited his business, Jameson Commercial Properties. I was 26 years old, and suddenly I was responsible for 93 employees, 17 active projects, and a legacy my father had spent 30 years building." She paused. "Everyone expected me to fail. The board members, my father's old partners, even Richard, especially Richard. But you didn't fail," Daniel observed. "No, I became ruthless instead." Margaret met his eyes. "I learned to see weakness as opportunity, to strike first and apologize never, to assume everyone wanted something from me, so I should take before I could be taken from. My father built his business on handshakes and trust. I rebuilt it on contracts and leverage." A man in the second row shifted uncomfortably. His wife whispered something, and he shook his head. "What would you do if you inherited more than you could carry? Would you rise to meet it, or would it crush what was good in you?" Margaret continued, her voice gaining strength even as tears continued to fall. "When I saw your name on the police report, Daniel Carter, it meant nothing to me. Just another obstacle to overcome. Another person trying to take something that was mine. I never connected it to the trucker my father talked about. Why would I? That was 7 years ago, and I'd trained myself to look forward, never back." "Your father kept that letter all those years," Judge Brennan said. "Robert showed it to me once, maybe a year before he died. Kept it in his desk drawer at the office. Said it reminded him that goodness existed in the world when business made him forget." Margaret's face crumpled. "He tried to tell me that. Near the end, when his heart was failing and he knew, he tried to tell me I was becoming too hard. That success without kindness was just another form of poverty." She looked at Daniel. He said, "Margaret, I met a man once who saved my life and wouldn't take a dime for it. That's the kind of person I want you to be." I told him he was being sentimental, that the world didn't work that way anymore. The weight of regret filled the courtroom like floodwater rising. Daniel's expression remained gentle, almost pitying. "Mrs. Ashford, I don't want your money. Never did. I just wanted the truth on record so my insurance rates wouldn't go up and I wouldn't lose my job. I've got 2 daughters. Katie's 9 and Sarah's 7. I need to keep driving to keep them fed." Something shifted in Margaret's face at the mention of his daughters. How old were they when this happened? The accident? Katie had just turned 9 in August. Sarah was still 7. Margaret fumbled in her purse, pulling out a photograph. Her hands trembled as she held it up. "This is Jennifer. She's 8. The photo showed a dark-haired girl with Margaret's eyes, grinning gap-toothed at the camera, holding a softball bat. She lives with Richard, has since the divorce 2 years ago. I see her every other weekend and Wednesday evenings." Her voice cracked. "She asked me last month why I was always so angry. 8 years old and she's afraid of her own mother." The courtroom had become a confessional. Daniel stood slowly from the witness stand. "Your Honor, may I approach?" Judge Brennan nodded, and Daniel walked to where Margaret stood. Up close, the contrast was even starker. His weathered face and calloused hands against her polished veneer now streaked with mascara and tears. "Mrs. Ashford," Daniel said quietly, "your father saved my life too, in a way. That $500 he insisted I take, I used it as a down payment on my first rig. became an owner-operator because of his generosity, built a small business, hired 2 other drivers. Your father's kindness created opportunities for 3 families. Margaret stared at him. I didn't know. I never... She pressed her hand to her mouth. I'm so sorry. For everything. For the lies, for the contempt, for forgetting what my father tried to teach me. Apology accepted, Daniel said simply. Judge Brennan cleared his throat. Mrs. Ashford, this court appreciates your honesty, but I need to be clear about the consequences of perjury. You've admitted under oath to making false statements to a police officer and pursuing a fraudulent claim. Margaret nodded. I understand, Your Honor. Whatever the consequences are, I'll accept them. The judge studied her for a long moment, then looked at Daniel. Mr. Carter, what outcome would you like to see here? Daniel didn't hesitate. I'd like the record to reflect the truth. That's all I ever wanted. And regarding Mrs. Ashford's admission? Your Honor, her father once showed me mercy I didn't deserve, treated me like I mattered when I was nobody. I figure I can return the favor. The simple grace of those words hung in the air like a benediction. But Judge Brennan's expression suggested the story wasn't quite finished, and that mercy, while beautiful, couldn't erase every debt. Judge Harold Brennan leaned back in his chair, the leather creaking beneath him, and everyone in the courtroom understood that mercy and justice were about to collide. The resolution of this case would determine not just who paid for a damaged Mercedes, but whether redemption was possible for someone who'd forgotten her own father's most important lesson. Mr. Carter, your generosity is noted and appreciated, Judge Brennan began, his voice carrying the weight of decades on the bench. However, this court has certain obligations that transcend personal forgiveness. Mrs. Ashford has admitted under oath to filing a false police report and pursuing a fraudulent insurance claim. These aren't minor infractions. Margaret remained standing, her posture somehow both defeated and dignified. She'd stopped crying, but her eyes were red-rimmed, her carefully constructed appearance thoroughly dismantled. Your Honor, she said quietly, I'm prepared to face whatever penalties are appropriate. The judge nodded slowly. The penalty for filing a false police report in Oregon can include up to 6 months in jail and a fine of up to $2,500. Insurance fraud carries even steeper consequences. He paused, letting the words settle. However, this court also recognizes voluntary confession and genuine remorse as mitigating factors. A woman in the gallery, elderly, wearing a faded floral dress, spoke up suddenly. Excuse me, Your Honor? Judge Brennan's eyebrows rose. Ma'am, this is highly irregular. I know, sir, and I apologize, but I knew Robert Jameson. The woman stood, her voice trembling but determined. My husband worked for him for 22 years. When Charlie got sick, cancer, Mr. Jameson kept him on payroll for 8 months while he did treatments, visited him in the hospital, paid for a second opinion that saved his life. She looked at Margaret. Your father was the finest man I ever knew, accepting my Charlie, and he'd want you to have a second chance, same as he gave my husband. Judge Brennan studied the woman. Mrs. Patterson. Helen Patterson. Mrs. Patterson, while I appreciate your testimony, I can't base legal decisions on, if I may, Your Honor? Another voice from the gallery. A man in his 50s, wearing a postal worker's uniform. I'm Tom Hendricks. I grew up 3 houses down from the Jamesons. When my dad walked out on us in '67, Mr. Jameson hired me to do yard work, paid me twice what the job was worth, put me through community college with those wages. He looked at Margaret. Your father talked about you constantly. showed everyone pictures. He was so proud. But toward the end, he was worried. Said you'd forgotten how to be happy. Margaret's hand went to her throat again, that unconscious gesture of protection. A third person stood, then a fourth, then a fifth, one by one. They shared stories of Robert Jameson's quiet generosity, the loans forgiven, the jobs created, the second chances extended without fanfare or expectation of return. The courtroom transformed into something like a wake, a collective remembering of a man who died 3 years earlier, but whose kindness still rippled outward. Judge Brennan let it continue for several minutes before finally raising his hand. Thank you, all of you. This court has heard sufficient testimony about Mr. Jameson's character. He looked at Margaret. Your father left behind quite a legacy. I know, Margaret whispered. I just forgot to honor it. The judge removed his glasses again, holding them like a prop for the difficult words to come. Here's what's going to happen. Mrs. Ashford, this court finds your initial claim to be without merit and motivated by false testimony. The case is dismissed with prejudice. You will pay Mr. Carter's legal fees and court costs. Margaret nodded. Of course. Additionally, Brennan continued, I'm referring this matter to the district attorney's office for review of potential charges related to the false police report. However, he raised a finger as Margaret's attorney started to object. I will be recommending a deferred prosecution agreement contingent on community service and full restitution. What kind of community service? Margaret asked. That will be determined by the DA, but I have a suggestion. The judge's expression softened slightly. Your father built his business on helping people. Perhaps you could spend 200 hours doing the same, working with those who need second chances. Daniel spoke up. Your Honor, if I could make a recommendation? Go ahead, Mr. Carter. There's a program at the Portland Rescue Mission. They help folks transitioning out of difficult situations. Homelessness, addiction, coming out of prison. They teach job skills, help with resumes, that sort of thing. Mrs. Ashford has business expertise that could really help people get back on their feet. Margaret turned to look at Daniel, her expression unreadable. You're suggesting I volunteer at a homeless shelter? After everything I've done? I'm suggesting you honor your father's memory by doing what he would have done. The simplicity of the suggestion, its complete lack of vindictiveness, seemed to affect Margaret more than any punishment could have. She nodded slowly. I'll do it. Not because the court orders it, but because... Her voice caught. Because my father would be ashamed of who I've become. And maybe this is a way to start becoming someone he'd recognize again. Judge Brennan made a note on his pad. Very well, Mrs. Ashford. You're dismissed pending the DA's decision. Mr. Carter, thank you for your patience and your character throughout this ordeal. He looked out at the gallery. To everyone who testified about Robert Jameson today, thank you for reminding this court that justice and mercy aren't always opposing forces. The gavel fell, but no one moved immediately. The room held its collective breath. Margaret gathered her purse and coat with unsteady hands. As she turned to leave, she found Daniel waiting in the aisle. They stood facing each other, the truck driver and the heiress, and in that moment, all the barriers of class and circumstance seemed paper-thin. Mr. Carter, Margaret said, would you allow me to buy you a cup of coffee? There are things I'd like to know about the day you saved my father. Stories he never got to tell me. Daniel glanced at his watch, a simple Timex with a cracked crystal. I've got to pick up my daughters from school at 3:30, but I could do 20 minutes. 20 minutes, Margaret agreed, That's more than I deserve." As they walked out of the courtroom together, Judge Brennan watched from the bench, and those who knew him well noticed the slight smile at the corner of his mouth. But what happened at that coffee shop, and what Margaret discovered about the father she thought she knew, would prove even more transformative than anything that had happened in court. The smell of fresh brewed coffee and rain-soaked wool filled the small diner 2 blocks from the courthouse, mixing with the sound of silverware against ceramic and the low murmur of lunch-hour conversations. Margaret Ashford had never sat in a place like Betty's Corner Cafe in her entire life, and that realization hit her harder than any gavel strike. The vinyl booth was patched with duct tape. The laminated menus were sticky at the edges, and the waitress who brought them coffee wore a name tag that read, "Dolores, 27 years, and an expression that had seen everything twice. Margaret's cream Chanel suit looked absurd here, a costume from a different play entirely. Daniel ordered coffee, black. Margaret did the same, though she normally took cream and sugar. "You don't have to pretend," Daniel said gently, noticing her grimace at the first sip. "It's okay to be who you are." Margaret set down the cup. "The problem is, I'm not sure who that is anymore." She folded her hands on the table, and without the courtroom's formal structure, she looked smaller somehow. Vulnerable. "Tell me about that day. March 23rd, 1969. What do you remember?" Daniel wrapped his hands around his mug, the steam rising between them. "I remember it was cold. Late winter cold that gets into your bones. I was hauling lumber from Astoria to Pendleton, running about 40 minutes behind schedule because of fog that morning." "Where did you find him?" "Mile marker 73 on Highway 30, just past the rest area. His car, a Lincoln Continental dark blue, was pulled halfway onto the shoulder. Hazards weren't even on." Daniel's eyes went distant, seeing it again. "I almost didn't stop. I was behind schedule, and there are always cars pulled over for one reason or another. But something made me look twice. The driver's door was open about 6 inches, like someone had tried to get out, but couldn't." Margaret leaned forward, her coffee forgotten. "I pulled the rig over, grabbed my first aid kit, always kept one under the seat, and ran back. Your father was slumped against the steering wheel, his face gray, sweating even in the cold. His eyes were open, but barely focused. He was clutching his chest so hard, I thought he'd break his own ribs." "What did he say?" "He said, 'My daughter. Tell my daughter I love her.' Those were his first words. Not 'help me' or 'call an ambulance.' Just that." Daniel's voice was soft. "I told him he'd tell you himself, but first we needed to get him breathing right. I pulled him out of the car. He was a big man, maybe 200 pounds. Got him on the ground, loosened his tie. His pulse was all over the place. Thready, weak, then racing." Margaret's hand had moved to her own chest, unconsciously mirroring the gesture. "I'd taken a CPR course the year before through the truckers' union. Never thought I'd use it. But when your father stopped breathing, maybe 30 seconds after I got him on the ground, I started compressions. Kept it up until the ambulance arrived. Felt like hours, but it was probably 7 or 8 minutes." "He never told me any of this," Margaret whispered. "He said a trucker helped him, but he made it sound so simple, like you just called for help and waited. Maybe he didn't want to scare you. You'd already lost your mother. I was 20 years old enough to know the truth." Daniel shrugged. "Parents protect their children, even when those children are grown. My Katie still doesn't know how close we came to losing the house last winter when work was slow. Why worry her?" Margaret studied his face, the deep lines around his eyes, the permanent crease between his eyebrows from squinting into sun and headlights. How do you do it? Stay kind when life is so hard? Who says life is hard? The question stopped her. Isn't it? You work long hours for modest pay. You raised 2 daughters after... She hesitated. After my wife left, Daniel finished. 3 years ago. Decided motherhood wasn't what she signed up for. Signed away custody without a fight. He said it matter-of-factly, without bitterness. Could I be angry about it? Sure. Could I let it make me hard? Absolutely. But then what kind of father would my girls have? They deserve better than a man who's bitter about what he lost instead of grateful for what he has. What do you have? Margaret asked, genuinely curious. 2 healthy daughters who think I hung the moon. A job that lets me see this whole beautiful country. Friends who'd give me the shirt off their backs. A warm bed and enough to eat. He smiled. Your father had all the money in the world, Mrs. Ashford, and you know what he talked about in that ambulance? You. Just you. Kept saying your name over and over. Margaret needs me. My girl needs me. Tears spilled down her face again. Quieter this time. He did need to stay. I needed him so badly, and I didn't even know it. After he died, I threw myself into the business because I thought that's what he would have wanted. But maybe what he really wanted was for me to remember how to be his daughter, not just his successor. Dolores appeared with the coffee pot. Refills? She glanced at Margaret's tears, then at Daniel, and her expression shifted to protective. Everything okay here? Everything's fine, Margaret said quickly. Better than fine. This gentleman is telling me about my father. Dolores softened. Lost mine 10 years ago. Still miss him every day. She refilled both cups without waiting for an answer and moved on. The small exchange, the waitress's casual kindness, the assumption of shared grief, made Margaret realize how isolated she'd become in her world of boardrooms and legal battles. Mr. Carter. Daniel. Daniel. She corrected herself. When you sent back that $500 the first time, what did you say in your letter? He looked surprised she knew about that detail. I said that saving his life was the most important thing I'd ever done, and putting a price on it felt wrong. That knowing he'd get to go home to his daughter was payment enough. And when he sent it back, he wrote that accepting the money would let him sleep at night, that he'd spend the rest of his life wondering if I was struggling when he could have helped. So I took it, not for me, but to give him peace. Daniel met her eyes. That's what kindness is, Mrs. Ashford. Sometimes it's accepting help, even when you don't need it, because the other person needs to give it. The wisdom in those words, from a man the world would dismiss as simple, struck Margaret like a revelation. She opened her purse and pulled out her checkbook. Daniel raised a hand. I don't want... I know you don't. But please, let me do this. She wrote quickly, then slid the check across the table. This is for your daughters. College fund, whatever they need. It's not payment for what you did for my father. It's... She paused, searching for words. It's what he would have done if he'd known you had children. Daniel looked at the check. His expression didn't change, but his hand trembled slightly as he picked it up. $10,000. Mrs. Ashford. Margaret. Margaret. He refolded the check. This is more money than I make in most years. Then let it be seed money for the future. Please. I'm not the person I want to be yet, but maybe letting go of some of what I've hoarded so tightly is a start. Daniel Carter pocketed the check with the same care he'd shown folding his daughter's drawings, and Margaret understood that some gifts change both the giver and the receiver. What happened next would determine whether Margaret's transformation was real or just another performance for an audience. 3 weeks later, Margaret stood outside the Portland rescue mission on a gray November morning, rain drumming against the awning above her head. She wore jeans, the first pair she'd owned in a decade, and a simple sweater. No jewelry except her father's wedding ring, which she'd started wearing on a chain around her neck. The building was a converted warehouse in Old Town, its brick facade water-stained and tagged with graffiti. Through the front windows, she could see people moving around inside. Men and women in donated clothes, volunteers in matching blue vests. The organized chaos of an operation running on hope and determination. She'd been coming here every Tuesday and Thursday evening for the past 2 weeks, plus Saturday mornings. 53 hours so far toward her 200-hour commitment. The district attorney had accepted Judge Brennan's recommendation for deferred prosecution, contingent on completing the community service and maintaining a clean record for 2 years. But Margaret had discovered something unexpected. She wanted to be here. "You're early again," a voice said behind her. Marcus Webb, the mission's director, was a compact man in his 60s with kind eyes and a salt and pepper beard. Former Marine, former addict, now 10 years sober and devoted to helping others climb the same ladder he'd climbed. "The job skills workshop doesn't start until 7. "I know. I wanted to prep the materials." Margaret held up a folder. "Tonight we're covering resume writing for people with employment gaps." Marcus studied her. "You're not what I expected when Daniel Carter called to recommend you." "What did you expect?" "Someone doing the minimum to satisfy a court order. Someone checking their watch every 5 minutes." He smiled. "Instead, I got someone who stays late, learns everyone's names, and last week bought new computers for the job training lab without asking for recognition." Margaret felt her face warm. "The equipment you had was 15 years old. How are people supposed to learn modern office skills on machines that can barely run? Most volunteers would have just worked with what we had." "I'm not most volunteers," she paused. "I'm someone trying to figure out how to be her father's daughter again." They walked inside together. The mission smelled like industrial soap, coffee, and the collective hope of 200 people trying to rebuild their lives. Margaret had learned the rhythms here. Breakfast at 6:30, job skills workshops in the morning, addiction support groups in the afternoon, dinner at 5, evening classes until 9. She'd learned the names. Jimmy, who'd lost his construction job after a workplace injury led to pain pill addiction. Sandra, whose husband's violence had put her in the hospital and left her homeless when she finally found the courage to leave. Robert, same name as her father, a Vietnam veteran who'd been on the streets for 8 years before finding this place. Margaret, a young woman rushed over, her face bright. This was Tanya, 24 years old, pregnant, staying at the women's shelter while completing her GED. "I got the job, the receptionist position at the dental office. They called this morning." Margaret found herself pulled into a fierce hug. "Tanya, that's wonderful. When do you start?" "Monday, and they have benefits, real benefits. Healthcare for me and the baby." Tanya pulled back, tears in her eyes. "That resume you helped me write, the way you taught me to address the gap years without apologizing for them, it worked. The office manager said I interviewed better than candidates with twice my experience. You did that yourself. I just helped you see what was already there." "No." Tanya's grip on Margaret's hands was firm. "You're the first person who looked at me like I was going to make it. Everyone else sees a pregnant homeless girl with no diploma, You saw someone worth investing in. After Tanya left to share her news with the caseworkers, Marcus spoke quietly. That's the fourth person you've helped place in jobs this month. You have a gift for this. It's just business skills, presentation, confidence, knowing what employers want. It's more than that. You make people believe in themselves. Marcus gestured toward the common area where residents were gathering for the morning workshop. You ready? Margaret sat up at the front of the room, arranging handouts on folding tables. 15 people filtered in, more than last week. Word was spreading that the workshops were actually useful. She began the same way she started every session. My name is Margaret, and I'm here because I forgot how to be kind. I built a successful business by being hard and suspicious, and always assuming the worst in people. It made me rich and made me miserable. So I'm here to learn as much as to teach. The honesty in that introduction, the vulnerability, created a space where others felt safe being vulnerable too. They worked through resume formats, discussing how to frame incarceration as time out of workforce and addiction treatment as personal development program. Margaret taught them interview techniques, appropriate dress, how to research potential employers. But the most powerful moment came when Robert, the veteran, raised his hand. What do I say when they ask why I was homeless? I can't lie, but telling the truth feels like confessing to failure. Margaret set down her marker. You tell them the truth, but you control the narrative. You say, I struggled after my military service with adjustment and substance issues. I spent 8 years finding my way back, and that journey taught me resilience, humility, and the value of second chances. I'm here because I don't take opportunities for granted anymore. Robert wrote it down word for word, his weathered hands making his handwriting look like a child's. The thing employers actually want, Margaret continued, isn't perfection. It's reliability and hunger. Someone who'll show up, work hard, and appreciate the opportunity. Everything you've survived proves you have those qualities in abundance. After the workshop, as people filtered out, a woman lingered. Margaret recognized her, Denise, late 40s, who'd been at the mission for 6 weeks after her small business failed and she lost her apartment. Can I ask you something personal? Denise said. Of course. Why are you really here? Daniel told us you're Robert Jameson's daughter. You could be doing anything, helping anyone. Why us? Margaret considered the question carefully. Because you remind me of what I almost became. I was 6 months from losing everything, not money, but everything that matters. My daughter barely knew me. I turned into someone my father wouldn't recognize. When I look at you, at everyone here, I see people who lost things but are finding their way back to who they really are. That's the hardest work in the world, and you're all doing it. She paused. I'm just trying to do it too. Denise nodded slowly. Your father would be proud of you. The words hit harder than Margaret expected, and she had to turn away to compose herself. That afternoon, as she was leaving the mission, she found Daniel Carter waiting outside in his truck. Katie and Sarah waved from the passenger seat. Mr. Carter, Daniel, what are you doing here? Heard about Tanya getting that job. Thought you might like to know you're making a real difference. He handed her an envelope through the window. Also wanted to give you this. Inside was a photograph. Daniel's daughters at their school's honor roll assembly, both holding certificates. Attached was a note in careful handwriting. Katie made straight A's for the first time ever. Sarah won the Citizenship Award. Thank you for believing in their future. The college fund you started means they'll have choices I never had. DC. Margaret pressed the photo to her chest, and for the first time in years, she felt something she'd forgotten was possible. Pure, uncomplicated joy. But standing there in the rain, holding evidence of lives changed by a simple act of generosity, Margaret didn't know that the real test of her transformation was still ahead, and it would come from the last person she expected. The phone call came on a Tuesday evening in late December, while Margaret was helping Sandra practice interview responses in the mission's quiet room. The voice on the other end made her heart stop. It was Richard, her ex-husband, and he never called unless something was wrong. "Margaret, it's Jennifer. She's asking for you." Margaret's hand tightened around the phone. "What happened? Is she hurt?" "She's fine physically, but she's—" Richard's voice cracked in a way she'd never heard before. "She's refusing to eat. 3 days now. The doctor says it's not medical. It's emotional. She keeps asking when you're coming to get her." The world tilted. "Richard, it's your week. I don't have custody until Saturday." "I know what the custody agreement says." His tone was sharp, then softened. "But our daughter needs her mother. Can you come?" Margaret was already grabbing her coat. "I'm on my way." She made the drive to Richard's house in West Hills in 20 minutes, her mind racing. Jennifer had been quiet during their last few visits, but Margaret had attributed it to normal 8-year-old moodiness. Had she missed something? Had she been so focused on her own transformation that she'd failed to notice her daughter struggling? Richard met her at the door. He looked exhausted, his expensive suit wrinkled, his face unshaven. "She's in her room. Won't come out except for school." Margaret climbed the stairs to Jennifer's bedroom. Pink walls covered with horse posters and her own crayon drawings. She knocked softly. "Jenny? It's Mom?" Silence. "Baby, your dad said you wanted to see me. Can I come in?" The door opened a crack. Jennifer's face appeared pale and drawn, her dark hair uncombed. "You came." "Of course I came." Margaret knelt to her daughter's level. "Can we talk?" Jennifer opened the door wider, and Margaret's heart broke at what she saw. The usually tidy room was in chaos. Clothes everywhere, books scattered, drawings torn and crumpled. On the bed lay a photograph. Margaret and Jennifer from 2 years ago before the divorce, both smiling at a pumpkin patch. "Jenny, what's happening? Are you going to leave again?" Jennifer's voice was so small. "Leave? Honey, I'm not leaving. I see you every week. But you're different now. You smile at me and you listen when I talk, and you play games instead of checking your phone." Tears spilled down Jennifer's cheeks. "And I'm scared that when you figure out you don't have to be nice anymore, you'll go back to how you were before. When you were always angry and busy and looked at me like I was interrupting something important." The words landed like physical blows. Margaret pulled her daughter into her arms, feeling the fragile bird-bone shoulders shaking with sobs. "Oh, Jenny. Oh, baby, I'm so sorry. You were never an interruption. You were never anything but the most important thing in my life, and I'm so sorry I made you feel otherwise." "Then why were you always working? Why did you miss my dance recital and my birthday party and parent day at school?" "Because I was broken," Margaret said honestly. "After your grandfather died, I thought the only way to honor him was to make his business bigger and bigger. I thought success meant working all the time, being tougher than everyone else, never showing weakness. But I was wrong, Jenny. So wrong." Jennifer pulled back to look at her mother's face. "Grandpa Robert?" "Yes. Did you know I never met the man who saved his life? Not until a few months ago." "The truck driver?" Margaret was surprised. You know about that? Grandpa told me. He said an angel in a big truck stopped to help him when he was dying, and that's why I got to meet him. Jennifer's voice was wistful. I was only 5 when he died, but I remember him saying that kindness was the most important thing, more important than money or being smart or winning. Hearing her father's words from her daughter's mouth made something crack open in Margaret's chest. You're right. He did say that, and I forgot. I let myself become someone who thought winning was everything. She took Jennifer's hands. But I'm trying to be different now. Not for a court order or to look good, but because I want to be the kind of mother, the kind of person that you deserve, that Grandpa Robert would be proud of. Is that why you're working at the homeless place? Margaret nodded. The rescue mission. I'm teaching people job skills, but really, they're teaching me how to be human again. How to see people instead of obstacles. How to give without expecting anything back. Jennifer was quiet for a moment, processing. Can I come with you sometime? To the mission? You want to? Grandpa used to take me to volunteer places. We gave out food at Thanksgiving once. He said helping people was the best feeling in the world. Jennifer's voice grew stronger. I want to feel that way too. Margaret pulled her daughter close again, breathing in the apple shampoo smell of her hair. Then we'll go together. This Saturday if you want. Promise? I promise. And Jenny, I need you to promise me something too. What? If you're ever scared or sad or angry, you tell me right away. Don't wait for it to get so big that you can't eat or sleep. Your feelings matter more to me than any business meeting or court case or anything else in the world. You are my priority, always. Jennifer hugged her tighter. Can I live with you now, instead of going back and forth? Margaret's heart ached with how much she wanted to say yes. That's something we'd need to talk about with your dad and probably a judge. But Jenny, whether you're at my house or your dad's house, you're always in my heart. Always. They sat together on the bed, surrounded by the wreckage of a child's emotional crisis, and Margaret understood that saving her daughter started with being honest about her own brokenness. Richard appeared in the doorway, his expression raw. She eating? Not yet, but we're going to order her favorite, vegetable lo mein from Golden Dragon. Right, Jenny? Jennifer nodded against her mother's shoulder. Richard's eyes met Margaret's, and something passed between them. Not romance, that was long dead, but a shared understanding of how close they'd come to failing their daughter. After Jennifer finally fell asleep, full of Chinese food and her mother's presence, Margaret and Richard talked in the kitchen over cold coffee. She's been asking about you constantly, Richard admitted. Not angry asking, but hopeful asking, like she was afraid to believe you'd really changed. I have changed, but not enough, not fast enough. Margaret wrapped her hands around her mug. Richard, I want to refile for primary custody, not to punish you, but because Jenny needs stability and I'm finally stable enough to give it to her. She expected him to fight. Instead, he nodded slowly. I think you're right. I travel too much, and my girlfriend. He stopped. Let's just say she's not maternal. Jenny would be better with you. You could still see her whenever you want. This isn't about cutting you out. I know. And Margaret? He met her eyes. I'm glad you found your way back. Jenny needs the mother you're becoming. As Margaret drove home that night, Jennifer asleep in the back seat with Mr. Buttons, the teddy bear from her childhood, she thought about Daniel Carter and his 2 daughters, about how he'd managed to stay kind through hardship while she'd let success make her cruel. She thought about her father, saving that letter for 7 years, trying to teach her that goodness existed. And she understood, finally, that redemption wasn't a destination. It was a daily choice to be better than yesterday. But what Margaret didn't know was that her story, the wealthy woman humbled in court, transformed by a truck driver's grace, had been quietly spreading through Portland's legal community, and it was about to change more lives than just her own. Judge Harold Brennan stood before a room of first-year law students at Lewis and Clark College, a manila folder in his hands containing a case transcript that had become his favorite teaching tool. The transformation of one woman had sparked something that needed to be remembered, that justice without mercy was just cruelty in a robe. Before we discuss constitutional law, Brennan began, I want to tell you about a case I presided over 3 months ago. A simple traffic dispute that became something else entirely. He recounted the story. Margaret Ashford's accusation, Daniel Carter's letter, the courtroom confession, the community's testimony about Robert Jameson's legacy. The students leaned forward, captivated. What interests me most, Brennan continued, is what happened after the case concluded. Mrs. Ashford could have done the minimum required by her deferred prosecution. Instead, she exceeded her 200 hours at the rescue mission by November and is still volunteering there 20 hours per week. She's helped 43 people find employment. She's teaching a free business workshop for women leaving domestic violence situations. She's become, in short, exactly the person her father hoped she'd be. A student raised her hand. But, Your Honor, doesn't the fact that she only changed after being caught and humiliated suggest the transformation isn't genuine? Brennan smiled. Does it matter? 43 people have jobs. Women have skills they didn't have before. Her daughter has a mother who's present and loving. Whether Margaret Ashford's change came from genuine epiphany or fear of consequences, the result is the same: good flowing into the world. Another student spoke up. What happened to the truck driver? Did he benefit from all this? Daniel Carter used Mrs. Ashford's gift to start college funds for his daughters. But more than that, he used the publicity from the case to raise awareness about Good Samaritan laws and roadside safety. He's been speaking at truck stops and union halls about the importance of stopping to help. Last month alone, 3 drivers credited his talks with giving them the courage to stop at accidents they might have otherwise passed by. The judge opened the folder, pulling out a newspaper clipping. 2 weeks ago, one of those drivers, a man named Tommy Vega, saved a family of 4 from a burning car on Interstate 5. When reporters asked why he stopped, he said, "Because Daniel Carter reminded me that saving a life matters more than making good time." The classroom was silent. The law, Brennan said quietly, can punish wrongdoing and compensate victims. But it can't create kindness. It can't manufacture compassion. Those things have to come from somewhere else. From fathers who write letters about gratitude, from truck drivers who stop when they're running late, from judges who remember that the people in their courtrooms are human beings capable of change. He closed the folder. Margaret Ashford came to my courtroom believing she was better than Daniel Carter because she had more money, more education, more power. She left understanding that she was fortunate to breathe the same air as a man that good. That's the transformation I hope to see in each of you. Not from pride to humility through humiliation, but from judgment to understanding through education. A student in the back row asked, "Do you think she would have changed without being caught?" "I honestly don't know," Brennan admitted. but I know that her father spent 7 years carrying a letter in his desk drawer, hoping his daughter would remember that kindness matters more than conquest. Sometimes people need to lose everything to find what really matters. Mrs. Ashford lost her pride, her self-righteousness, and her illusion of superiority. In return, she found her father's legacy, her daughter's trust, and her own humanity. After class, Brennan walked to his chambers and made a phone call. Margaret answered on the second ring. "Harold," she said warmly. They'd become friends in the months since the trial, united by their shared love for Robert Jameson. "To what do I owe the pleasure?" "I just told your story to a room full of future lawyers. Thought you should know you're becoming a cautionary tale." Margaret laughed. "Good. If my public humiliation can teach someone else to be better sooner, then it was worth it." She paused. "Harold, I'm having Christmas dinner at my house this year. First time in 5 years I've felt capable of hosting. Daniel and his daughters are coming, and some folks from the mission. Would you join us?" "I'd be honored." On Christmas Eve, Margaret's house in the West Hills was transformed, not by expensive decorations or catered food, but by the presence of people who'd learned to see each other as family. Daniel's daughters, Katie and Sarah, played with Jennifer, teaching her card tricks. Tanya from the mission, now 5 months pregnant and thriving in her receptionist job, helped prepare dinner alongside Sandra, who just signed a lease on her first apartment. Marcus from the mission sat by the fire with Judge Brennan, swapping stories about Robert Jameson. Margaret stood in her kitchen, the same kitchen where she'd once barked orders at caterers and barely noticed the food, and watched this collection of unlikely friends sharing her space. Her father's letter, now framed, hung on the wall where everyone could see it. Daniel appeared at her elbow, holding 2 glasses of wine. "Quite a change from how we met." "I was insufferable." "You were hurting," he corrected gently. "And you'd forgotten how to be anything else. Thank you for not giving up on me, for showing me grace when I deserved judgment." Daniel clinked his glass against hers. "Your father showed me grace first. I'm just passing it on." Later, after dinner was cleared, and the children were drowsy with food and laughter, Jennifer climbed into Margaret's lap, something she hadn't done in years, and whispered, "Mom, is this what Grandpa Robert's life was like? Full of people he loved?" Margaret kissed the top of her daughter's head, breathing in the miracle of this moment. "Yes, baby. Exactly like this." As the guests began to leave, bundled against the December cold, each person hugged Margaret goodbye. Not the stiff, formal embraces of her old life, but real hugs that meant something. Daniel was last to leave. At the door, he turned back. "Margaret, I want you to know something. That day on the roadside when I found your father, I wasn't thinking about reward or recognition. I was just doing what felt right. But if I'd known that saving his life would eventually lead to this." He gestured at the house full of warmth and connection. "To you finding your way back to who you're meant to be, I'd have driven twice as fast to reach him." After everyone left, Margaret sat in her father's old chair, the house quiet except for Jennifer's gentle snoring from the couch. She pulled out the letter. She'd long since memorized it, but she still read it sometimes when she needed to remember. "You gave me the gift of future years. I hope I'm using them the way you wanted, Dad," she whispered to the empty room. "I hope I'm finally making you proud." Outside, snow began to fall over Portland, rare and beautiful, covering everything in silent grace. They say that on certain winter nights, if you drive past the rescue mission in Old Town, you can see a woman in the window teaching a workshop, her students' faces lit with hope. Some claim she's Robert Jameson's daughter, still there after all these years, still trying to honor the father she lost, and the truck driver who reminded her what honor meant. Others say it's just a volunteer who looks like her. But the people whose lives she's touched, they know the truth. Redemption isn't a single moment in a courtroom. It's every choice you make after the gavel falls. If this story moved you, take a moment to comment below. Share where you're watching from and what this story meant to you. And if you believe in second chances, hit that like button and subscribe. These stories matter, and your support helps us tell more of them.